Hello, everybody. Today we're going to do our notes on pages 4 and 5. Please make sure you have your packet sitting open so you can see both pages because we're going to go back and forth between the diagram on page 4 as well as the notes on page 5. So we're going to start with the top of page 5. The Earth is divided into many layers, and each layer has its own unique characteristics. Now, these layers form due to density differences, which we'll get into that in more detail a little later on, but we end up with these distinct layers, okay? So we're going to use this chart about layers of the Earth on page 5 to go through and look at some of the characteristics and some facts about each of these layers. Starting with the outermost layer, we have the crust, and you saw a video about this that gave you some information about Earth's crust. Notice that it says crust/lithosphere, and I want you to think about the word lithosphere and what that means. You know what litho means. Litho is rock, and sphere, of course, spherical, right? So this is the rock layer on the outside of the Earth, the outermost layer. There are two sublayers that make up the crust, and the first one is the continental crust. Just like the name sounds like, it is the continents, right? It's the land that's on the surface of the Earth. The phase of matter that you will see this in is solid, and its primary composition is granite. Now, in the column that says color in the diagram, I'm going to be using some colors here on my notes. You can use the same colors I did. You can choose something different. You're going to use colored pencils. Please use that instead of markers. And what you're going to do is choose a color to represent the continental crust. And then whatever color you've chosen, color in this box with that color because it's going to correspond to your diagram. Okay? Then you're going to take that same color and you're going to go over to page 4 and you've got this diagram that's representing the layers of the Earth. Now you'll notice that where I have orange on this diagram is kind of sitting what looks like outside of the main layers of the Earth, right? This is representing our continental crust. Okay, so color those in. Pause as needed through all of this coloring thing. Just pause whenever you need to color to make sure that you get it finished before you move on. All right, as you finish coloring, you're going to go back to your notes on page 5. There's a couple pictures of Earth's crust and some granite. And as you finish coloring, go back to page 5, and the other sublayer is the oceanic crust. And for this one, you actually don't need to color because it is going to be the black line that is the outermost circle is going to represent our oceanic crust. So it's already colored for you. It's black. It's that black outermost circle. Oceanic crust is just like it sounds like. It is the crust that is under the ocean. The phase of matter is solid, and the primary composition is basalt. Okay, some interesting information to add about the crust is that this is the thinnest layer. It's also the coldest layer. There's temperature involved here with these layers of the Earth, which is part of the differences in density that then give us the different layers. And it's also not a solid layer. It's broken into plates, and we're going to get into plate tectonics a little later on. All right, so that is the crust. On your diagram, we're looking at this line, this outermost circle in your diagram. Okay, so not the whole layer, but just that black line that already exists. All right, this is a picture of basalt underneath the ocean, down on the surface of the ocean, the ocean floor. Here's what basalt looks like up close. All right, back to the notes on page 5. Now we're going to look at the mantle, which is the middle of the 3 main layers. And then you'll notice that we have 2 sublayers in the mantle. So we have the upper mantle and the lower mantle. Let's talk about the upper mantle first. I'm going to use blue. You use whatever color you want to represent the upper mantle. Now, the upper mantle is a semi-solid, which has some really unique properties. We're actually going to explore that in a lab tomorrow, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about that right now. We also sometimes refer to it as being plastic-like. It's got some give, it's got some movement. The main composition of the mantle is magma. And some interesting information to connect to that is about convection currents. And we're going to go into a lot more detail about convection currents a little later on, so I'm just kind of giving you the short story on that today. Over on page 4, pause for a moment and color in the upper mantle in whatever color you chose. All right, and then as you finish coloring, let's go back over to the notes. The lower mantle is solid, and it's composed primarily of igneous rock. And an interesting fact here is that this is our thickest layer. This is the thickest layer of the layers of the earth. Now, of course, with it being the thickest layer, this is going to take the longest to color. So as you finish with the notes, go back over to page 4 and pause while you add color to your lower mantle. So finally, we're going to go back to the notes on page 5. And now let's look at the core. The core, of course, is at the center of things here. And there are 2 sublayers in the core. We've got the outer core and the inner core. Now the outer core, which I'm going to represent with yellow, is unique in that this is a liquid layer. It is a liquid layer. And it's got to be really hot to be liquid iron and liquid nickel. Our main composition is these heavy metals, iron and nickel, but in liquid form. So that just kind of gives you an idea of just how hot it's got to be in there, how high the temperatures are. Now, some interesting information to connect to this is it's because of this layer of the earth that Earth has a magnetic field. Again, we're going to talk about that more in a little bit, so I'm just going to leave that there for now. Head on over to your diagram on page 4 and pause it while you color the outer core, the color of your choice. All right, and as you finish with your coloring, go back to page 5, and the inner core, which I'm representing with red, is solid, and it's primarily made of iron. Again, another really heavy metal. Now this is the hottest layer, but because it's so squished together in there, it's not liquid. There's so much pressure in there, it's actually solid, even though it is hotter than the outer core. All right, so go back over to page 4 and complete your coloring. All right, and then back on the notes, we've got some kind of main numbered interesting information here, just some general things about the Earth being layered. First of all, lithospheric plates. As we mentioned, the crust, both the oceanic and the continental crust, is broken into approximately 12 major plates is what we call them. Basically, they're main sections of the Earth's crust. If you look at this diagram, they're represented in different colors, and you might take a minute to study this and notice how it aligns with the edge of some of our continents, or aligns with other features of the Earth that you might recognize. Now, this place where the plates are divided, where they are separate plates, are called plate boundaries. So this is the border of 2 plates. It's where the 2 plates are touching each other. Sometimes we have plates that are running into each other. Sometimes we have plates that are kind of going side by side each other, and sometimes we have ones that are pulling away from each other. And all of these are going to create different kinds of things happening in the Earth's crust, and different features on the Earth, and different kind of activity going on the Earth. Okay. So convection currents are when we have molten magma in the upper mantle that's moving due to differences in density. This causes the plates of the lithosphere to move as well, so we get some motion involved with this. Now, a little later on in this unit, we're going to spend quite a bit more time going through convection currents in detail. For right now, though, this diagram I think is helpful, just showing that we get these circular motions, these currents going in a circle, It all has to do with heating and density. So you start with materials getting heated up, and as they do, they melt or they become less dense. And when they become less dense, they start to float above the things that are more dense around them. And so they'll come up closer to the surface of the earth. But as it gets up to the closer to the surface of the earth, it starts to cool off. And as it cools off, it becomes more dense and sinks down until it heats up again. So this cycle will continue and continue, and this is going to drive a lot of things happening underneath the surface of the earth. It's going to influence volcanoes and earthquakes and the movement of these plates that we're talking about. All right, plate tectonics is the theory that the crust is broken into plates and that the plates are moving. So this whole kind of branch of science here together on this is called plate tectonics. And again, it is the movement of these plates that's causing a lot of things. Here you can see, if you look at some of these plate boundaries, you can see that there are places, if you look at the little arrows, there's places where they're being pulled apart from each other, and there's places where they're running into each other, and you will find landforms here at these places, as well as activity like volcanoes and earthquakes. And finally, the magnetic field. The liquid metals of the outer core are constantly spinning. Okay, so remember we got the Earth spinning, and that's going to cause this liquid to also be in motion. And this provides, along with solar radiation from the sun, it provides this magnetic field that ends up surrounding our planet. Now, this is why a compass works. All right, for instance, that we have this magnetic field around us. All right. Now, as you finish with the notes on 4 and 5, at this point, you should have everything colored over on page 4 and on page 5. All of your notes should be filled in, and your chart should be color coordinated with your diagram. On page 4, what I'd like you to check is you may or may not have labeled your diagram as you went along. So if you did not already put labels on, pause now and add labels to all the layers of your diagram. Label them with the different sub-layer names that we have on our chart. As you finish up here, what you're going to do is you're going to use the next video I have posted. It's a great video that goes into a lot of detail about each of these layers of the earth. And so what I'd like you to do is on this page 4 diagram, I would like you to add some facts about each layer of the earth. And you can just like add them around out here and then maybe add an arrow going to whatever layer you're writing about at the time. And I encourage you just to get as much information as you can added to this diagram.